Welcome to the world of Rowan astrology. I'm David Charles Rowan, and you join us on this Rowan style introduction to the Dynamics of Astrology, a course that was recorded in 2023 for you to follow and enjoy and gain a lot more insight into the nature and breadth of what is possible from astrology. Over this series, we'll explore not just the signs, planets, houses, and aspects and their meanings, but also why each thing means what it means. And why does the symbol of this look like that? And what is it about that shape that carries this particular meaning? And you'll learn how to read the language of astrology as easy as if you were reading text from a book. And this course places astrology in a broader context of history, both history of the world and Western philosophy, and the history of astrology itself, and the evolving consciousness of mankind. We take a broad sweep through associated fields such as psychology, mythology, spiritual perspectives, paganism, sacred geometry, numerology, and a little bit of neuroscience and psychobiology. The purpose of this introduction course is to provide you with a foundation upon which to build your astrological knowledge and expertise, so you're able to continue with self-study or stay here with me for the deepest exploration of astrology, astrobiography. And before we begin exploring this goldmine of astrology, please remember to like and subscribe. This channel would be nothing without your kindness and support, so please feel free to return and explore the growing content, and of course, your comments are always welcome. Thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Hello there.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hi.
Yeah, good, good, good. Right, we are back again. Now, last time we looked at esoteric perspectives and a little bit on past lives and how that might kind of dovetail or connect or correlate into astrology. And you would have got the handout called Celestial Pathways. Have you? Yes. Has anyone had a chance to look at that?
No, sorry.
No? Okay. Just wondered if anyone else here has had a chance to have a look at that booklet thing.
No, sorry. Didn't have
Okay.
time.
All right. Well, it's there for you when you want to get to it. Okay.
Brilliant.
All right.
Thank you.
So that's all right. Now, the focus of today, the main theme, certainly up until tea break, is on psychological perspectives. The reason for this is that, as we've already kind of started to kind of allude to, you can look at certain parts of the chart and get correlations with the dynamics of a person's unconscious. And I spoke before, I think in class number 3, on how misfits were the walkers between places and the walkers between worlds. And they end up, by the time you get into the 19th century, on the receiving end of the gaze in tiny cell-like rooms at the beginning of psychiatry. So I'm assuming, as an assumption, that everyone here has heard of Freud. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has anyone here has anyone here read any of Freud's work?
No. No.
Kind
No?
of.
Sorry?
Partly. Partially.
Partially. Okay, so you read a bit. Brilliant.
A bit.
Okay. Has anyone here heard of one of his pupils called Carl Jung?
Yep.
Yeah.
Carl Gustav Jung, right. Has anyone read any of Jung's work?
Snippets.
Snippets. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So from Freud, you might have got an idea that he had a topography of the mind. So he said that there was an ego, which is like a control system, and there's a superego, which is an advanced control system, and a sense of identity called an id. And he had various theories through his life of how human beings grow and become adults. Carl Jung was one of his pupils for a while till they had a falling out. Carl Jung liked astrology and alchemy, whereas Freud, oddly enough, liked numerology and Egyptology, but he didn't like the other things. Carl Jung proposed theories of the collective unconscious, introvert and extroversion, and he came up with some psychological types. But famously, in letters to Freud, he once said that astrology is the sum total of the psychological knowledge of antiquity. And in another letter to Freud, he wrote that he looks at the astrological birth chart of every new client before he begins the first session. Wise man, older, Mr. Young. How about Melanie Klein?
No.
No, you haven't
No.
heard of Melanie Klein. Okay,
No.
Melanie Klein was another kind of German analyst just around the time of Freud and Jung. They were like a little trio in a sense. But Melanie Klein did something rather radical. She actually talked to children. That might sound odd, but Freud proposed his theories of child development without speaking to a single child.
Golly.
I know. He talked to adults about their memories of their childhoods, and he formed these theories from those.
That's ridiculous.
Well, that is what it was. And Melanie Klein actually had the brainwave. I think I'll actually talk to one and find out how they see the world and what it's like for them. She proposed kind of notions like the good enough mother. In that a lot of mothers have pressure to kind of be excellent and amazing and, super. And perhaps you can kind of relax if you just adopt the notion of being a good enough mother rather than a superhero mum. That might be easier to meet as an expectation, right? Yes. And she looked at how children sometimes find themselves in a quandary, in that they can both love and idealize their parents, but also detest them at the same time, because parents are the great naysayers, and parents say you can't have sugar, and parents say you can't have sweets and things like this. So on the one hand, they're the hand that feeds, and on the other hand, they're they stop the joys of life. And so there can be resentment and love built into the same emotional system. And what does that do, and what happens with that? So a lot of the British psychotherapy schools quite like Klein's work. Anyone here heard of Rogers? No, Carl Rogers. He came up with what he called client-centered therapy, probably around the 1940s, 1950s kind of time. So his humanist approach to client-centered therapy became like the thing of its time. And then in the early 1970s, there was a couple of guys called Richard Bandler, John Grinder, and they started looking at different therapies and therapists. And they thought, because it was the time of the lunar landings and that kind of thing, the space race, they thought if we got technology where we can land someone on the moon, surely we can create a technology where someone can walk into a room and say, I'm frightened of spiders. And you talk to them for a little bit, and when they walk out the room, they're not frightened of spiders anymore. Surely we should be able to do that. So they started looking at therapists and making notes of when the therapists worked well. And they amassed a body of knowledge, and they didn't know what to do with it. They were doing little workshops and things. A local radio station got wind of what they were doing and said, come and talk about what you're doing. And they didn't have a name for it. And Richard Bandler was a computer programmer, and he was reading a book on linguistics, and they called it neuro-linguistic therapy, or neuro-linguistic programming, sorry. And so that started a new strand of looking at people and how people can be changed or healed or affected by talking therapies. Since about 1994, with computers getting better, scanners getting better, our knowledge of the brain improving, people like Alan Shaw, Louis Cozolino, Damasio they've been creating this body of knowledge, Jack Pansett, of affective neuroscience. In other words, the neuroscience of emotions. In the 1950s, Bowlby came up with his idea of what he called attachment therapy. Have you heard of attachment therapy, anybody?
Yes.
Yes.
No, okay, all right. Well, one might think of attachment in the Buddhist sense of being attached to something. Right? And in Buddhism, it's said that being attached to things is unhealthy, because if you're attached to your job or your football team or whatever, and you lose your job or your team kind of fall down the well, then suddenly you're going to be in a vulnerable position. But attachment theory isn't quite like that. It looks at basically separation distress. So if there's a group of early hominoids kind of walking through the Serengeti, and they're surrounded by big cats, 360 degrees predation, this little group of hominoids walking along these flat grass landscapes, and yet they survived. And we have these brilliant frontal cortex, which enables us to outwit a pussycat, which is a very good thing to be able to do. And one of the things our ancestors sort of generated was almost like a piece of elastic in the solar plexus in the tummy. So if a child kind of wandered away from the group a bit too far, so far that a predator could get between, like an alarm bell fires off in the child's tummy and it runs back to the group like a piece of elastic. And that mechanism is separation distress. And Bowlby said that it's natural that all affectional bonds are broken. So every affectional bond that you form with any creature will break at some stage. It's not the breaking of the bond that's the calamity. It's the quality of the repair. It's the quality of the reparation. So if mum's with baby and the doorbell rings, mum will put the baby down and go and answer the door. In the moment that mum turns her back and walks out the room, the affectional bond is broken. Mum comes back into the room. Now, there are different ways that mum can return to the baby. If mum goes up to the baby and looks in the baby's eyes and makes contact and begins to doogie, 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 or kind of like that, in that kind of sing-songy voice, which that sing-songy lyricality is described by the word prosody. Prosody means the musicality or the lyricality of communication. And it's been noted that the billing and cooing that you get between mother and baby has the same rhythmic structure as birdsong.
It's interesting.
And poetry can have the same rhythmic structure too.
Mm.
But, have you ever, you might have seen or heard on a street corner, a Manic Street Preacher, and I don't mean the Welsh rock band, but an actual Manic Street Preacher going, praise and the Lord, and the Lord. When you get those kind of people on a soapbox in a Hyde Park or just in a street corner across the shopping precinct, you might notice that people give them a wide berth. You ever notice that people tend to, they don't just walk straight past the person, they kind of go around, right? As if somehow they're going to be infected or the sound is contaminated going your brain.
Yeah.
And it's actually not too far from the reality, because it's been noted that the prosody of religious fundamentalists and Manic Street Preachers is similar in rhythmic structure to someone who's either having an epileptic fit or someone who's having a schizophrenic episode. Right? Which is why we don't like the noise. Right? It's not necessarily the content that we don't like, it's the rhythm structure. It hurts. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Right. So, attachment theory then. Mum comes back in the room. If mum makes eye contact and speaks in a billing and cooing kind of way and is very friendly, then the baby instantly starts to feel reconnected. And in that moment of reconnection, the broken bond is repaired, and the baby will grow up, 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 and the baby will grow up with a very secure sense of attachment inside themselves, or what you maybe call self-confidence. If mum comes back in the room and looks at baby and then immediately goes into the kitchen to start to prepare a bottle or get some food, mum's doing a wonderful thing. She's been a great mum. She's getting a bottle together. She's getting food for the baby. But as far as the baby is concerned, all it can see is the back of mum's head. And so because there isn't eye contact, the bond isn't repaired fully. It's partially repaired. Or if mum goes upstairs to attend to things, or maybe even goes to the loo, the baby will feel bereft and abandoned. And in attachment theory, it's said that those qualities of reparation are the bedrock or the foundations for psychopathologies, OCD, inclinations towards being bipolar, inclinations towards depression, and things like this are fostered in those formative years. And the dynamical relationship between mother and baby plays a major role in the directional orientation of the baby's kind of psychological trajectory. Now, that's a theory, and it's an interesting theory. And according to Shaw and Cosolino and people, the neuroscience that's been coming out, with the scanners has largely been very kind of scathing towards Freud's theories. Freud's theories don't match what the neuroscientists know. And a lot of the psychodynamic models, Freud, Jung, Klein, etc., don't stack up when you look at data, what goes on in here. But the one theory that does seem to be supported is attachment theory, or this stuff about separation distress. That does seem to kind of hold water. Mm-hmm. There's a chap called Ernest Lawrence Rossi. Anyone here heard of Ernest Lawrence Rossi?
No.
No?
Yep.
Okay. He was a young doctor in the early 1970s, and he met a hypnotist called Milton Erickson.
Oh, heard of him.
Yes, Milton Erickson is often considered to be the best hypnotist that's lived in recorded memory. And he had polio when he was a child, and he was often in a wheelchair. And Ernest Lawrence Rossi was fascinated with the fact that Milton could control his pain using hypnosis. So they started talking and they collaborated with each other. They wrote about half a dozen books together. And then in the early 1980s, they realized they were both struck with the idea of placebo. So a doctor gives you a pill with nothing in it, and you get better because you think there's something in it.
Mm.
That's a thought. And they wondered, is it possible to configure language in such a fashion that you could stimulate or ignite the placebo healing response?
Wow.
Would that be possible? Sadly, Milton died around 84, 85, but Rossi continued the research and published a book called The Psychobiology of Mind-Body Healing, and spent the next 30-odd years adding layers and layers to his work. And he called his approach to things psychobiology. The group of professors that have been distilling information that's been coming out of neuroscience labs and kind of feeding it back into the psychotherapeutic world are now kind of under an umbrella of interpersonal neurobiology. And I kind of stumbled on this when I was doing my MSc about 12 years ago. And it's my go-to place for books. So although I'm an astrologer, over the last 12 years, the only books I buy, about 98% of the books I buy are interpersonal neurobiology. Absolutely fascinating with what goes on in here. It's quite incredible. So that's a bit of a timeline of different kind of psychological approaches, which are all very different to clinical psychology. If you study psychology at an academic level, Freud and Klein will barely be mentioned. Quite often, Carl Jung isn't mentioned at all. He's seen more of a philosopher than a psychologist. Essentially, clinical psychology boils down to rats and stats, really. Um, they want kind of psychology to be a science. I was in a social psychology lecture, and the lecturer said he didn't believe that psychology is a science. And yet there we are having a science lecture on the very subject, with the teacher saying, actually, I don't think this is a science at all. It does get a bit peculiar when you start studying psychology at a kind of an academic level. But we know that Carl Jung had the idea that there is such a thing as projection. A projection is an archetype that's locked up in the self or hasn't yet come to fruition. And instead of us understanding that it's our quality within us, we see it in the behaviors of others. So have you ever heard of the kind of notion that qualities that you dislike in other people are quite often qualities that we dislike in ourselves?
Yes, projecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a Jungian idea, but also the converse is true as well. Qualities that we admire in other people are qualities that we haven't yet discovered within ourselves that we like about ourselves as well. It's not just all the bad stuff, you know. Now, talking of which, you might kind of have the notion that the relationship between mother and baby is a symbiotic relationship, or what would be described in an academic term as a dyadic relationship. It's a two-way communication, a two-way flow. Because sometimes mother and baby are having a difficult day because mum's in a grumpy mood, and the baby picks up on that. And then now baby's having a grumpy mood. Right? But sometimes it's baby that starts it. Sometimes babies can be grumpy. And if a baby's in a grumpy mood, then that will filter through into the mum. Now the mum's in a grumpy mood because baby started it. Right? Sometimes you don't know who started it. Right? But it all kind of swirls around. And what happens in the mum's emotions ripple through into the baby's emotions, which ripple back into the mum's emotions, and it's like a feedback loop. And that's actually how babies learn to regulate emotions. In other words, if mum is mature, wise, and enlightened, the baby will pick up on that and grow more easily into a mature, wise, and enlightened person. But if mum is a bit tender, slightly volatile, prone to kind of weeping every minute of the day, then the baby kind of starts to copy that emotionally, because how mum regulates and controls her emotions is transferred into the baby's experience through in a learning kind of way, what's often called imprinting. Okay so far?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So what you find then is that not only is a baby's experience kind of introjected into them, but it's also introjected out from them into the environment as well. And what you find in an astrological birth chart is almost like a bit of a chicken and egg type dynamic. Because an astrological chart, for example, can give you an idea of how a person experienced their father. Okay. And so you can see that, say, if someone's got Saturn in the fourth house, they'll experience their father in a Saturnian light. Right? And then they find that the dad actually is like that. And if you talk to the person about their father and you describe what a Saturnian type father would be like, they would say, yes, that's exactly what he's like. But is he like that because he's like that? Or is he like that because that's how they view him? And how he responds to them is a reaction to how they are kind of expressing themselves towards that person to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
A bit like some of our relationships might be what they are because we have like a self-fulfilling prophecy dynamic built in, an expectation of a certain type.
Yeah.
You know, I was doing a reading once for this large rugby player guy, and I described his mum, and he thumped the coffee table, made the caps jump. He went, "You can't possibly know that about my mum." And I said, "Well, is it right?" He said, "Yeah, but you can't know that." And then we carried on doing the reading. And after a while, we got to a part of the chart that deals with our relationship with our in-laws, our partner's parents. So I described this guy's girlfriend's parents, right? And he said, no, I can't take this. No. I said, what? He said, are you telling me that of all the women in the world, all the millions and millions of females in this planet, that I'm with this person so that I've got that person as like a father-in-law? And I said, no. And he said, but you just said he was da 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 and she's da da da. I said, yeah. And he said, so you're saying then that I'm with this woman so that I've got those people as... I said, no, I haven't described your in-laws at all. He said, you did. I said, I didn't. He said, you did. I said, no, I didn't. I described your experience of them, your perception of them, but I haven't described them as people. You need to look at their chart to see what they're like as a totality. You've got an in-laws relationship with a person, but their friends would see them differently. Their work colleagues might see them differently. Their parents might see them differently. Because we look at the people in our lives through certain niche lenses of context. And that started to kind of make his brain really melt. And he started to implode. You know? But this notion that we have models of expectation, and that when we meet the world through lenses of expectation. And sometimes it is the case that those lenses are in place right from the first breath, day one. And the only explanation for that could be that there's a planning room before we're born, that the astrological birth chart is configured from the moment of the first breath, so everything's set in place from the first breath. But also we have past lives.
Yep.
So I was there's a wonderful old book. It's written in the late 40s, 1950s, and it's a very old kind of language. It's not politically correct in any way, shape, or form, but it's a thriller. And this thriller book involves astral projection. And there's a moment when our hero is astral projecting and he goes through a tenement block. And in this tenement block, there's an old lady who can't get to sleep. And so he makes some healing passes over her body. And an old lady comes out of the old lady's body and kind of looks at him a bit suspiciously and goes through the wall off to do what she's doing. Then there's a young person, this young lady who can't get to sleep. I think it might be a child. And he does the same thing to help this child go to sleep. And a fully grown man comes out of the child's body in white robes, bows graciously, and then flies off through the ceiling. Right? So from an esoteric perspective, when we're born, we might be a majestic, wise soul with the eons of kind of wisdom, at our fingertips, but we find ourselves kind of attached to this tiny body that hasn't yet got the cognitive equipment to be able to explain, I'm hot, can you please turn the fire down? And all we can do is go, wah. And we hear the language around us, and there are things that are familiar, but we haven't yet got the cognitive equipment to deal with it all. But you can feel that you understand certain dynamics that you can't articulate. Does anybody remember being like that as a child? Kind of sort of sensing that the adults are being silly on certain occasions, and they're making really daft decisions, but you can't do anything about it because you're too small to even engage in it.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
So many.
Yeah, it's a bit odd, but it can be like that. So the maturity of soul is a separate path, if you like, to the physical maturity of the growing body through time. Yeah.
Yes.
So using astrology, it's possible to kind of get an idea of how people might meet the world in various contexts, even before they've actually done it. You can look at a person's birth chart and know how they'll feel if they travel abroad before they've ever traveled abroad. It's kind of useful. If you're running a meditation group, you can have an idea of what kind of experiences each individual will have during meditation before they begin.
Great.
Which is very useful indeed, because some people abreact when they have meditations, and other people take to it very easily and they love it. Getting them back is a tricky thing. Okay, now, you know what my cartoons are like. I just want to show you, first of all, before we have our first tea break, some correlations of how some of this astrology language might connect or correlate with a person's psyche. So this is very, very basic. All right. I can't express enough how basic and simplistic this is. It's just to illustrate things. But we start with this. Right. So here's a person's head. And as we've kind of mentioned before, you could say that this part here at the front, this is illustrative. It's not accurate, right? We could say that this part represents the conscious mind. Now, the function of the conscious mind is twofold. It's one part of it is to express to the outside world whatever's being experienced on the inside. So it's a messaging system, you see. And the messages from the inside come into the outside through physical gestures. Right? It comes to the outside through sounds. No matter how we're speaking or what's going on with our kinds of tones of voice that can change from time to time, and whether we'd like to speak in a slow, meandering voice, or we talk in a bit of a strange accent, however it's coming out, our prosody can somehow reflect or communicate the feelings that are going on inside us, you see. Bit like that. So we have these expressions. Whatever's happening inside you ripples through your skin. It ripples through your central nervous system. You might think that you're being very discreet and you're not giving away the secret, but there'd be a twitch, which people who play poker call a tell, right? A little giveaway thing. And so Darren Brown does his kind of magical things of knowing someone's PIN number, because as you think of your PIN number, parts of your body will twitch in response. Very, very tiny, minuscule cues. And he's taught himself to pay attention to these very, very subtle cues. But we all have a peripheral vision, and we all have these things. You know? So we express ourselves to the outside world, but also the conscious mind's job is to get data, stimulus from the outside world and to bring it into the brain. So we take in the information through sights and sounds and tastes and smells and things like this. But we also bring in information for our skin. Skin is the largest organ as well. So we have all sorts of sensations, 2 million signals a second coming into our brain. Now, if you could remember and you were aware of every picture you've ever seen, every smell you've ever smelled, every taste you've ever tasted, every sound you've ever heard, all at once, you would just collapse. You'd be overwhelmed. The stimulus would be too much. It would be such a cacophonic din, you wouldn't be able to make sense of it at all. So this is just a metaphor. It's not a fact, it's a metaphor. So just imagine that behind the conscious mind, there's a thin membrane-like veil or curtain, right? And most of that data that comes in goes into the back of the head. And we're only aware of one or two things. Okay, so consciously, men generally tend to be aware of sort of one thing at a time. Women apparently can be aware of 2 or 3 things at once. Wow, multifaceted cognition. But for the most part, the main bulk of the sensory input remains below the threshold of conscious awareness. So there's stuff slewing into our system and we're kind of sort of consciously unaware of it. If someone calls your attention to something, then you become aware, you know. So you could be walking along and someone says, oh, did you know there's this little spider on your ear? That's when you notice it, you know. Or someone might say, hey, you cut yourself. You didn't realize that you got a paper cut. Then you go, ah, funny, it only hurts when you see it, that kind of thing. So conscious awareness, largely designed to make sure that we are navigating the world safely. And so the conscious mind is attuned to look for predators and threats. And on that kind of level, what it's looking for is difference. It's looking for difference. So just imagine that you get a new job, right? So you get a new job, and you're going to walk to work, but you're taking a route you've never walked before. So you go down Smithson Street and then turn left into Park Street, right? So you go down Smithson Street, you start to see everything. It's all new. There's a house with a white gate. There's another house with solar panels on a ceiling. There's another house that's got a green letterbox, and then just turn into Park Street. And after you've gone this route for maybe a couple of months, you won't notice the white gate anymore. You won't even pay any attention to the solar panels. You might see the green letterbox, but you suddenly notice the scooter that's always in the hedge. So the details that you notice, first of all, sort of go into the background. They just become, you know, like the wallpaper of the experience. And it's the bicycle wheels sticking out. It's the roller skate on the floor. It's, you know, it's the differences that you start to notice rather than the stuff that's expected. And that process is called habituation. So, you know, when a person learns to drive, I don't know if you remember this, but you sit on the wrong side of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bit odd, sitting on the wrong side. You bang the wrong elbow, you know. And you might have seen parents drive before, but now you're looking at these pedals and things. And when you're going to change gear, you have to look down to see where the things are. And you don't notice a man on a bicycle just before you run him over. After a while, your body, your muscle memory starts to know where the pedals and things are. And you can operate the car and you can look through the window at the same time. And you can see the man on the bike before you run him over this time, right? You know, after a while, you can go around roundabouts and change radio stations, looking at the thing, and go round a roundabout, and you're not even looking where you're going. Right? Seeing people do things like that. So, yes, the conscious mind is looking for difference, and especially it's attuned to anything that may or may not be considered to be a threat. Okay?
Yeah.
Behind the conscious mind, we have the accessible memory. These are where we store the memories of the things that we can remember. So if you've ever been in a situation where perhaps it's Christmas and you're with relatives that you don't normally get on with, and there's someone who insists that while you're watching the film that they try to name the actor of every single person who comes on the screen, and sometimes they can't do it, and they go, oh, it's he was in I know it. He was in I was only watching it last week. He was in it. Oh, what's his name? And the dialogue of the film is lost in this kind of conversation about who these people are. Now, what's kind of happened in a way is that light has gone into the optic nerve of the person, and it's gone into what is this, and they've identified it as a recognizable face, right? And then they've asked themselves the question, what's the person's name? And it's almost as if a little kind of rummager messenger chap has then leapt into beyond through this membrane and is rummaging around in unconscious memory looking for the name of the person. Right? But this thin, flexible membrane becomes like a solid wall when we put pressure on it. Right? When you want to remember, you can't, because it can't get through. It's become like a solid wall. It's only when the person relaxes, and it's like 3 hours later when they're driving home, that then they go, oh, Rod Steiger. And now they remember the person's name. That happens to people in exams. That happens to people on quiz shows and things. That happens to people when someone suddenly says, here's my birth chart, tell me what it means. Right? Sometimes, if we feel under pressure, we can't access memory. But when we can relax, then we can access memories, and the memories we can access are in this accessible unconscious part here. There's another place behind that, if you like, or a deeper realm: repression. Now, repression is a very, very useful device. I've got a way of kind of chatting about it, which might illuminate something. Then again, it might just be going over old ground that you've kind of heard before. Well, we'll see what you think. Just imagine that there's one of our distant ancestors, a Paleolithic cave person, walking through long grass, feeling very hungry. Hasn't eaten for ages, and they've been wandering through tundra, and this person's become kind of detached from the group somehow. Hasn't eaten for days, and there's like a plateau of long grass, and just by some rocks on the other side of the long grass, there's a bush with berries on it, red berries glinting in the sunshine. And they go, "Oh, red berries, bum, 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 bum," right? And they start to walk towards the red berries. The only thing is that they're not paying attention to where they are, because their eye is on the berries instead of the land around them, right? And all of a sudden, something stands up in the grass in front of them. And the light in the environment bounces off the object, shoots up the optic nerve of the person, and their brain says, "Picture coming in, picture coming in." Boom. What is it? And they say, "Oh, is it a starburst? No. Is it a tree? No. Is it a giraffe? No. Is it a worm? No." And eventually it lands on what it is. It's a saber-toothed tiger. And then another part of their brain says, "What does that mean?" And then they go, "Ah!" All of that happens in a millisecond, right? In that moment, as soon as they recognize threat, their heart speeds up, because their brain releases endorphins and adrenaline. The endorphins act like an anesthetic. The adrenaline is something we need because we now have to either fight or flight a big pussycat. Right? You can't just tickle it with a stick. You've got to whack this thing. Right? And that means you need more power, because a little stick won't do. You need a tree, right? Or a big rock. So straight away, the lungs start to pump more power into the muscles. The breathing speeds up, and then we can get ready to attack or run as fast as we can. But there's another thing that takes place, which might seem a bit innocuous or trite, but it's very, very useful if you deal with people, or even if you want to deal with yourself a little bit better. Is there anyone here that's been to the cinema in the last 10 years?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have the experience before the main showing comes on that there are trailers?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you hear something like this? Next week, Bruce Willis fights a monster.
Something like that.
Did you hear something like that?
Yes.
Or was it more along the lines of, "It began. They were alone"? Did it sound more like that?
Second one.
Yeah. Now, I spoke to someone who used to do the psychology of shops. They used to design shops. And they told me things like they look at the sponginess of the floor and the height of ceiling. If you've got a shop where you want people to kind of go through quickly, you have a low ceiling and a very hard floor, and that funnels people through. If you want people to linger, you have a higher ceiling, nice spongy floor. And if you look at the counters, a counter that's sharp, right, they want you to get out quick. A counter that's round, they want you to lean. And it's all manufactured like that to kind of direct traffic flow of people. These films in cinema, they spend billions on these things, right? They need their money back. They need a return. Everything in that cinema isn't designed for your comfort when you watch the show. it's designed to get you to come back again. They want you to go out the door and come back in again in a loop, right? So since they spend so much money on every tiny minute detail, you'd think that the voice that goes along with the advertising and the trailers would be there for a particular reason. So why do they use this voice? Why do they use that voice?
Build suspense.
Does it build suspense? Yeah, maybe. Anything else?
Intrigue.
Yeah, that's like suspense, isn't it? Yeah.
To draw you in, really.
Yeah, but why does it draw you in? Why doesn't they use this voice? You know, this voice can explain the film perfectly clearly. Thank you very much. Why don't they use this one?
Because of you.
Sounds like the predator in your example, in your story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's scary.
Yeah, indeed. You're getting there. Yeah. When I was about 16, a local, well, not local, but a music paper, Melody Maker, don't remember that, Melody Maker did a series on how to start a band. And I was in a punk band from school, and we were really bad. And I don't mean wicked, I mean we were fucking awful, right? So we were desperately trying to understand why we were so bad, why we couldn't stand it, right? And in this series, that one of them was about how to find a singer, and this rock rag said, "This might sound strange, but find a singer who sounds like a girl." And it said, if you think about it, if you think of the harmonies of Queen or Yes or Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant's voice, right? They're all high pitched, and that's because rock and roll is like a thundering express train of bass, right? And you need a whoa to get over the top of it, to hear it sonically, right? Years later, in the year 2000, I was on safari in Africa, and there was some antelope and around some bushes, and all of a sudden, one of the antelope's ears went bolt upright, and it went ma 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 ma, and straight away all the other ears, they all stood up and they all going ma 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 ma, and they disappeared quickly. And I thought, ma, ma, I've heard that tone before, and it sounded a bit like a Led Zeppelin song called I can't remember the name of it now, but it sounded a bit like Black Dog. It sounded a bit like Black Dog. Hey, mama, ma, ma, ma. And I thought, I thought maybe foliage acts like a bass absorbent, right? So thousands of years ago, there'd have been some deep-voiced antelope going, excuse me, I think there's a lion. I'm sure I heard a lion. And only the high-pitched ones survived. So one of the things that takes place when we register danger or threat is our throat contracts. And that makes our voice go up in pitch. So then we can go, warning, 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 warning. And other people can hear the warning because it will travel through objects more easily rather than kind of, so the group can hear it rather than get lost in the foliage of life. So when we receive a threat, we've now got a lot of our breathing changes because we've got to pump up the muscles. So the breathing starts to become faster. And as the breathing becomes faster, the body becomes more animate, becomes more agitated. Our voice goes up in pitch and our hands go like that. Because we've got to hold a boulder or a rock or punch, right? So I know some people who get a little bit of stage fright. And when they get a little bit of stage fright, they have been told to do breathing counts. So they're on a stage and the person is announcing them and they're going in, two, out, in, out. Then they hear their name. And here's Mrs. So-and-so, 2, 3, out. Hello, everybody. 2, 3. Welcome today. 4, 5, 6. Very difficult to do breathing counts while you're trying to think of what you're going to say. Yes, it's very hard to do that. What's much easier is to just let your hands go loose and floppy by your side, like a rag doll. When you let one or both hands go loose and floppy by your side, it tells your brain that the danger has passed, because you can't do that with your hands when danger's around, because they want to do that. Right? So, you know, if you're in a conversation with someone and it's getting a bit agitating, just let one or both hands go loose and floppy, and you'll be able to return to a state of calm in real time. And you can do that in a traffic jam as well. And you can do that, you know, in a supermarket queue, because you're behind the lady who's got arthritis and a bag of pennies, you know, and you can see your bus just about to leave, right?
So would that work in an exam situation then, David?
It would help.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting it's, you know, it's not a full-blown hypnotic relaxation technique.
No, of course.
It's just a little micro signal to tell your brain, relax. You know, just in case it's not appropriate to kind of do breathing exercises and close your eyes and count yourself right down to one and, you know, chill out. But it can assist the body in going into a state of calm. Now, just imagine, right, that our ancestor has seen a saber-toothed tiger, and in a millisecond, he decides to leg it and run for it. So he's running as fast as he can, right? Run, 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 run. Now, while you're running away from the saber-toothed tiger, a part of you wants to learn, because a part of you wants to be able to see tomorrow, right? And so there's a part of our brain that goes, what happened there then? Well, there was some flattened grass. Did you see the flattened grass? I saw the flattened grass. Did he pay attention to the flattened grass? He never pays attention to the flattened grass. Told me once and told me 1,000 times. If you see flattened grass, you keep away from the flattened grass. But no, he saw the flattened grass and he's gone, just ignore me. Now look at us. Now look at us. Now look at us. Right? The analytical part of our brain wants to figure out how we got into that situation. Right? But if while we're running from a saber-toothed tiger, we stop, go, oh yeah, next time I see flattened, then you get eaten. Right? You can't afford to slow down. No, 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 no. You must focus on escape. Nothing else. Just 100% focus, escape. We are the descendants of these focused people. The people who went, stop, scratch your head. Yeah, there was some guy. No, they didn't continue. We are the descendants of the ones who learned something special. And that is, while we are in escape mode, everything else that could disrupt our escape gets pushed to the side and literally goes into what might be described as an amnesia box. And it's out of sight, out of mind, fully, literally. It's so unconscious, we don't even know it exists. All we know is tunnel vision, focus, get up that tree. Right? So then we get up the tree and there's the pussycat kind of circling down below. And you get yourself in the branches and try to not fall asleep and fall out, because there's a pussycat circling down below. And that will give you 2 or 3 days till it gets bored of being able to do your analysis then. Right? And then, as we relax, then the conscious mind can begin to retrieve little snippets of what took place. And then eventually we have the whole experience. These are called flashbacks. So people who have car accidents, for example, quite often have an amnesia about the accident. They can't actually remember the accident itself. And that's because it's been repressed, because the body is, all the energy in the body is directed into healing. While the body's healing, the distractions of analysis kind of deplete resources. So it's only when the body is strong enough to remember what's taken place that then the person can start to kind of re-access the memories. What often happens is when we re-access memories after a trauma, we don't like them. So some people go to their doctor, which is what they're taught to do, and the doctor says, that's not good, and gives them a suppressant tablet. So then they push it back into the unconscious again, which means it doesn't get sorted out. The function of this is to hold information in abeyance until the body is strong enough and capable to deal with it, and to then release it back into conscious awareness so that it can be learned from, healed, and integrated back into the system as a whole. But what happens sometimes is that the things that are put into the repression box stay there. So, for example, imagine there's a little boy about 5 years old, He's playing with matches in his bedroom, and mum and dad don't know. And he accidentally sets light to the curtains. This flame goes up to the ceiling. Right? He shouts out, "Ah!" Dad hears the noise and opens the door. Now there's this beam of light coming through the doorway, and Dad's standing in a beam of light, full of rage. Ah, the fire is going to kill you. The smoke, the choking fumes, and now your support system is angry with you. You're going to die. And that might be a bit too much for a 5-year-old brain to kind of hold, you know? So it just represses it. And the 5-year-old can't remember it. But it spins. Think of it a bit like, imagine you've got magnetic tape loops in the back of your head. And all of your memories spin around and round and round and round. And they keep spinning until they are stopped. But until they're stopped, they still keep spinning, right? So now we've got a young person growing up with a burning issue, literally a burning issue, right? And for a reason they can't quite explain, they get a job in a chip shop, a Saturday job working in a fish and chip shop, because they're around hot stuff. And every now and again, they burn their hands on bits of, mechanical things. And while they go, ouch, and that releases some of the repressed emotion, it's not quite the same. Because the way that it becomes released is like a tuning fork. So you need something on the outside to replicate or to be similar to whatever is repressed on the inside. And when they match, like a tuning fork, ding, the repressed stuff comes back up into the body again, and the person is consciously aware of it. The sights, the sounds, the taste, the smells, the fear, the feelings, etc. And that's when it can be released from the system. So the unconscious wants all the repressed stuff to come out. And that means it has to try to get the person, unwittingly, unconsciously, of course, to get into circumstances that replicate the original condition. So then the repressed things can come out. So for a reason this person can't explain at all, when they're 21, they become a volunteer fireman. And then when they first shout, clang, 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 on a big red truck, and they go along to the high-rise block, and there are the flames going up to the sky. And in that moment, the image of those flames matches the image of the flames going up the curtains. And the person is now not just dealing with the fear of going into a burning building, but they're dealing with the fear that they experienced way back when they were 5 again that they can't remember. And all of that supercharges their body as they go into the building. And in that moment, they are now released from the yearning need to kind of get into that situation again. Oh, it's a very good mechanism, and it works very well, but it can be inconvenient. You know, if there's a 7-year-old girl it's told, it's your turn now, Felicity, to read out loud, and she doesn't like reading out loud. So instead of reading out, she does a thing called gabble and gets the book and says, and then he said, and then he said, and then we went, and then we went, and then we said, and then he said, and then he said, and when we went, trying to get it out the way, right? And fumbles or stumbles, and people around start laughing, and she notices even the teacher's laughing. Oh, terrible. Wouldn't that be awful? Even the teacher's laughing. That's too much for a 7-year-old's brain, so puts it in the repression box. Many decades later, you've got someone who's 47, and they're a manageress of the company, but they never do presentations. They always delegate, never do presentations, because they're quite sure, they don't know why, they've been trained, but for some reason, they just never bother. You know, and that's because their unconscious could be convinced that if they do a presentation, people will laugh at them, even though that's not going to happen. So what we put in our repression box isn't necessarily powerful trauma. A lot of people might think, oh, repressed stuff, it's got to be big. No, sometimes it's being told off for picking up an apple. You know, it can be all sorts of things. We might slip on the pavement and feel a bit embarrassed. And if we don't deal with that in the moment, all of the things that we haven't dealt with, that's a lot. Big things, little things, medium things, they're all stacked away in the repression box, just looking for chinks in the light in order for them to come back out into consciousness again. If you are engaged in a process of self-investigation, self-illumination, self-knowledge, when repressed material comes back up to the surface, we call it illumination or enlightenment or an epiphany or an awareness. If things come up to the surface and they catch us unawares and we didn't expect it, we call it crisis. This is so common in hypnotherapy work that it's given the name abreaction, because if you're using relaxation techniques with people, quite often when a person relaxes, that's when the state of consciousness alters, an altered state of consciousness, and that means repressed material can come up to the surface unexpectedly. And so we're trained, and I train my students to be able to kind of deal with that in the moment if such a thing arises. That can also happen if you're doing an astrological reading and you start to talk about the parts of the chart that represent repression, because the mere act of talking about it can literally press a person's buttons and stimulate things, or trigger is the modern word. Okay? So you can use an astrological birth chart to know in advance what a client's trigger points are. And that can be useful if you want to bring stuff up, and it can be useful if you want to step around things and not necessarily bring things up yet.
So is it good for maybe people who suffer with anxiety?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good, all sorts of, yeah. Anxieties and things. There's also, you notice that this membrane has dots in the crown, because when we looked at the wine glass metaphor, so there's a spirituality and a collective unconscious as well, which is an even deeper realm of the self, where our unconscious meets and has dialogue with the unconscious minds of, well, anyone and everything. And that anyone and everything phrase can be just creatures, life forms on planet Earth, if you want to think of that, or life forms in other schools, if you want to think of those too, or other astral realms or dimensions. It depends on the scope of your sense of being as to where that can open to. Down here, I know we put it down, maybe it's really high, we have what could be described as psychobiology and the vagal nerve. This is the mind-body stuff. So there's a part of the chart where you can look at the dynamics of a person's mind-body relationship and understand how their physicality interplays with their mind and their emotions, and what their health conditions will be like through life. There is a field, a branch of astrology called medical astrology. I'm not well versed in medical astrology. I'm not a medical person. I didn't do biology at school. I don't know what the bits are called, let alone know how they function, right? So that's my disclaimer. I'm also not a financial advisor. So parts of the chart to do with kind of, I don't know, stock exchange, stocks, shares and investments and that kind of stuff, that's just a mystery to me as well. So I only know the parts of astrology to do with human relationships really is kind of my kind of lensing of focus. Now, the conscious mind parts are, we find out about those by looking at the condition of Mercury. And what I mean by that is the sign and the house, the sign position of Mercury, the house position of Mercury, and the aspects to Mercury. We also look at where Gemini is in the chart as well, and the planets and signs in a part of the chart called the third house. To understand the dynamics of the accessible unconscious, we look at the fourth house, Cancer, and the condition of the moon, the sign the moon is in, the house, the placement of the moon, and the aspects or angles of other parts of the chart to the moon. For the repressed box, you look at the 8th house, Pluto, and where Scorpio is in the chart. And that gives you the information of what a person might repress and what kind of things might release repressed material. For the collective unconscious and spirituality, we look at Neptune and Pisces and a part of the chart called the 12th house. And for the psychobiology information, we look at Mercury again, but this time the earthy side of Mercury and the sign of Virgo and a part of the chart called the 6th house. How's this so far?
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's really bringing astrology down to earth right?
Mhm.
So in other words, you can look at a person like that, and it kind of almost starts to give you like a map of the landscape of the person's mind. But there's some other things as well that I thought I'd share with you because they just might be interesting for one or two people here. Let's just get our words back again. I'm going to tidy this up in a minute. Don't worry, it will become even clearer. But there's a planet called Mars, which rules Aries. And the condition of Mars seems to correlate with our affective system. So our temperament expression, how we deal with anger, how we deal with rage, how we deal with self-expression, how we deal with temperature oscillations in our body, the homeostasis of the system. Would you know what I mean by the term affect in a neuroscience perspective?
No.
No? Okay. So you probably know the word affect as a verb, right?
Yeah.
It describes something being affected, right?
Mhm.
But in neuroscience, it's used as a noun. It's the name of something, right? And it's the name of pre-conscious stimulus. Pre-conscious stimulus. So an easy way to illustrate it is imagine that someone picks you up, sweeps you up in their arms, and they plunge you into a bath full of icy water without any warning, right? You would go, bah! Or you would go, ooh, right? Now, that's the affect, right? A millisecond of your body registering the temperature change and the feeling of that in your body as just a, right? As soon as you go either ooh or ah, you changed from affect to emotion. So affect is the precursor of emotion. You can think of it as ki. You can think of it as your chi. You can think of it as pranayana. You can think of it as Mars, depending on how you want to, what language you want to use. Right? Another way of thinking about it is if you think of the central nervous system like an old-fashioned telephone exchange with women wearing headsets and plugging things in and out of the box in front of them, right? The cabling of the telephone exchange, the wiring, is the central nervous system. The electricity that carries the message, that's the affect. So the affect isn't the message itself, it's the electricity that carries it. It's the energy, the fizz, the buzz inside us, right? And since 1994, Alan Shaw has been kind of developing these theories of affect and affect regulation, but also affect dysregulation. And in affect theory, the notion is that all psychopathologies are the direct result of a person having dysregulated affect. It's discussed in a different way in neuroscience than it is in psychotherapy. Psychotherapists interchange the word affect for emotion, so they have notions that there are positive affects and negative affects, whereas a neuroscientist just sees it all as stimulus, and how that comes out is just an expression, and that might be pleasant, it might be unpleasant, but it's an expression. So, for example, if you do any hypnosis work, you might notice that as a person starts to relax, sometimes they giggle, right? It's not because they're mocking the situation. That giggle is an affect release. And if a person releases an affect, that lets you know that they're going into a deeper relaxation. So sometimes people might involuntarily twitch, and that's a release of affect. If somebody says, fucking hell, that's a release of affect, right? But if someone burns themselves, goes, oh, that's a release of affect. Right? So you can see a person kind of shouting in the car park of Waitrose, right? And think, oh, look at that bad-tempered person on the one hand. Or you can say, oh, there's a human being discharging affect because their body wants to rebalance the homeostasis. And everything we do is all in the name of rebalancing the homeostasis. That's all our system wants to do. Just get into equilibrium. Right? So it can help if you're in a volatile situation with a human being who's being very vocal and loud, to kind of see them as a person who's releasing affect in that moment rather than just being furious, because it's a lot easier psychologically to deal with a person who's discharging something than it is to kind of deal with the person who's in murderous kind of rage, because that's frightening. But someone who's discharging something becomes a technical thing, and that makes it slightly easier to deal with without getting caught up with your own emotions. That might be a helpful thing. We can also look at the fourth house, Cancer, the moon, and also a part of the chart called the second house to get an idea of a person's attachment schemas. What kind of things represent the secure base for the individual? What do they have an emotional need for? So some people can have an emotional need to be heard. Other people have an emotional need to eat cake. Different people have different emotional needs, right? Attachment therapists, of course, want to help a person internalize their secure base so that it's something you carry around with you rather than hook onto a football team or a god or a religion or a person. From my dealings, from what I can tell, Neptune and Pisces correlate with the autistic spectrum. So everything from mild dyslexia to full-blown autism with dyspraxia, dyscalculus, Asperger's syndrome, etc., kind of on that scaling. So you can kind of look at a person's Neptune and Pisces dynamics in a chart, and also a set of aspects called septiles, and tell fairly quickly if a person alludes to the autistic spectrum. The only thing you can't do with the astrology is know how far along that spectrum they are. So you don't know if it's just mild dyslexia or whether or not it's very strong dyslexia or whether or not it's dyspraxia or whether or not it's Asperger's or full-blown autism. That you can't tell. But what you can tell is that they're kind of in that area. Likewise, Aquarius and Uranus seem to correlate with ADHD. Yes. Have you ever seen those kind of very early experiments that used to be done in kind of the late 18th century with electricity? And they would do things like pump all the gas out of a jar, fill it with helium, put an electrical charge for it. And when you put your hand near the glass, you get the crackles of electricity following your hand around, right? Well, that's how people with Mercury and Aquarius, for example, think. Their brains just going dim dum dim dum dim dum dim dum, making non sequiturs or apparent non sequiturs, but they're actually making very fast connections very, very quickly, but other people just can't keep up. It's everyone else that's too slow, really, as far as the ADHD person's concerned. But yes, yeah. So Uranus and Aquarius would correlate with that. And from what I can tell, there are three kind of distinctive different types of depression. Aries depression, Martian depression, seems to be a depression where a person isn't doing something they want to do, or they're not saying something they want to say. So they're thwarting themselves. You either express or you depress. So if Aunt Maud comes into the room and she's wearing a hat that you think looks silly, because you've recognized in your head, oh, that looks silly, you now have to give it expression. Because if you don't, then you'll be depressing it. And that means you're on the path of depression. But it's rude to say, you look silly, Aunt Maud. But if you can find a diplomatic way of doing it, say something like, Aunt Maud, you have a style all of your own. You're giving expression to the moment, and she thinks that you've complimented her. That's called tact and diplomacy. It's a very fine art. Saturnian or Capricornian depression seems to be the expectation of failure, the expectation of things going wrong, the expectation that judgment or evaluation will fall against one. So there's an ingrained pessimism, if you like. That's not easy to deal with, but it can be done. One of the key antidotes, as far as I can tell, to a Saturnian depression is planning. Thinking something through deeply and planning something in time. You can build a ladder out of the hole. That seems to work. There was a 17th century herbalist called Culpeper don't know if you've ever heard of Culpeper, the herbalist, but he was also an astrologer as well. He dabbled in alchemy, and everyone who was an alchemist was also an astrologer as well. And he once said, the deity that brings the illness also brings the cure. So you need movement for Martian depression. You get moving. That's a Martian thing to do. You need to plan well. It's an antidote to Saturnian depression. Neptune or Piscean depression is one of the hardest to deal with. It's sort of forlorn, a wistful, kind of forlorn feeling, which is really rooted in divine homesickness. A sense that you're here, but I want to go home. I don't want to be here anymore. Don't like this place. It's rough and horrible. Yeah. So helping a person to kind of find something of merit or light or something that's worthy with that can require an infinite sense of compassion, which is exactly what they need. Now, if we just list those out, then you end up with a thing like this. So here's a little list of, it's not a complete list by any means, of some things to do with mental health, etc., and where you might find them in an astrological chart. And there's a person with a chart in their head ready for a person to just merely read it. What do you think of all that?
Fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Favorite part so far.
Say again?
That was my favorite so far. It was brilliant.
Ah, right. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now
Yeah.
is have a cup of tea.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then, yes, it is a phenomenal thing, you know.
What about the Pluto depression style?
Pluto in depression. Pluto is more of an immobilization than a depression. So when Pluto is kind of activated, sometimes a person can literally play dead. But that's a. I'm assuming, maybe you don't, right? Did you know that your brain didn't evolve ding in one go, but it kind of grew over years, right? I live in an old Victorian house at the moment, and this Victorian house is kind of rambly, and it's obvious that bits have been stuck on it, you know. So I go through into the kitchen, and that looks quite Victorian, and there's a kind of an old kind of Argo and things. And then when I go through into the utility room, it's kind of old. There's an old pump, a like Victorian pump. And then when I go through the next door, there's a wet room, right? Completely incongruous to the house itself. Our brains are like that. So around the brain stem at the top of the spine, there's a bit of brain that's amphibian. And we still have an amphibian part of our brain, and it still functions. That's how sometimes you can see something before you saw it, because you've got the cells that enables a frog to see a fly and catch it that quick. That's still in your brain, right? Around that, there's a reptilian brain, and around that, the primate brain, which sometimes is called the monkey brain, and on top of that, then you've got the Homo sapien frontal lobes. Right? So we've got these layers of evolution in our brain, and a lot of creatures, when they're surprised or they encounter a predator, they freeze.
I can see you won
Because,
competitions as a child.
yeah, because most creatures haven't got color vision. A lot of predators see in black and white. And so if you freeze and you absolutely completely still, they can't see you. It's only when you move that they can see you in contrast with the background that's behind you.
Wow.
You know, I've got a pond, and, you know, quite often if the frogs are out kind of, you know, sunbathing, and you go out there and they'll sit still and you look away, and then it's a bit like the angels in Doctor Who, you know. They only move when you look away. Except instead of coming towards you, they're going further away. Right? Yes. So so Pluto would represent that part of us that is in death threat and therefore goes into immobilization. Okay. All
Yeah,
of
so
that,
then, yeah.
all I know.
Yes.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, so then maybe we expect someone with a Pluto style of depression to have no expressions at all, to have no response.
Well, very few people are like that. That does happen occasionally. I guess people go into catatonic states and things, don't they, as well? Like I said, this is a simplistic overview, if you like. This is not an in-depth look at mental health correlated with an astrological chart in an in-depth way at all. It's just an introduction discussion. But yes, it is possible to kind of start to correlate a variety of psychopathologies with different astrological phenomena. So then you can use astrology to identify possibilities. Remember that everything in a birth chart is polysemous. All of the symbols represent potentials, not actualities. So you can see a potential for, say, dyslexia, but you don't know that the person's dyslexic or not.
Oh, okay.
But it can open the door to inquiry about diagnosis. And that can be a useful thing, So, I've had people kind of come to me and they've had kind of problems understanding themselves a bit. And it's been pretty obvious that they've got an autistic dynamic. And so I've kind of recommended that they, seek diagnosis. And then suddenly they found that they are on the spectrum. And now they have some information and they have some ways of understanding themselves, which are far more enriching in their lives than they had before. So it can be useful. I know partners, men and women who have got partners who they think are on the autistic spectrum, but they haven't gone anywhere near diagnosis, and the family don't believe in that sort of thing. But they wanted to know for themselves, is Uncle Fred a bit kind of dyslexic? And you kind of have a look, go, yeah, that explains it. Right, okay. So now at least they can relate to Uncle Fred in a better way because they know Uncle Fred's got Mercury in Pisces, for example. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Now,
Okay.
good. Right. We're going to have a break. When we come back, we're going to start looking at how to read these things. Right. We're getting to the how of it. All right. Yes. Any comments or thoughts before we go? Any questions?
Yes, I just
Okay. One at a time.
I just said it was brilliant stuff. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Go ahead.
there was just a small aside when we were talking about babies and children and attachments. There was a woman who, I don't know if you saw this in the news a few years ago, she created a cardboard cutout of herself because her child would not let her leave the room at all. I just thought it was really funny because she put this cardboard cutout and then she was able to go to the toilet and stuff like that. The other thing was, I wanted to ask you about the book that you mentioned that was from the 1940s or 50s, which was a story that included astral projection.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the name of the book?
Yeah, it's called Strange Conflict. And it's by Dennis Wheatley.
Oh.
Yeah. If you like astral projection, and if you can just kind of bypass the language of its day, with reference to other ethnic nationalities and things like this, because it's kind of written in wartime and it's a bit kind of conservative. But the actual information about astral projection and things is just stunning.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I have to read that.
You take a flight of fancy with someone, you come out of the person's body, you go off and you go to different astral realms and layers and things. And he's basically acting as a spy in the war. And so he follows different souls on their journeys because he's trying to find out who's giving away the secrets, and it's a stunningly written piece. It's really, really cool.
Look forward to reading it.
Is it fiction or non-fiction?
Well, yeah. You see, that's the thing. I mean, it is a fiction book, but it is about how come, the the Germans were accessing convoy information when only 2 people had the information and they weren't speaking to anybody.
Yeah.
And that's the conundrum at the beginning of the book. How are these secrets getting out when no one's actually having a conversation? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff, although it does go into some strange places near the end, but it's still cool. You know, but for the astral part of it, it's an interesting thing. Right. Okay, let's go grab a cup of tea. See you back here in 10 minutes and we'll start looking at a bit more of the astrological chart itself. Okay, see you in a moment. Thank you for watching this fascinating window into the nature of being human through this fine and ancient art of astrology. It is truly a pleasure to share these astro adventures with you, and please ensure you like and subscribe and continue exploring. Auto Q05, take 4. Thank you for watching this fascinating window into the nature of being human through this fine and ancient art of astrology. It's truly a pleasure to share these astro adventures with you, and please ensure you like and subscribe and continue exploring the deepening wisdom and illumination that resides within the art of Rowan astrology. Until next time, I wish you peace and good health, and please take very good care of you. Bye-bye.